Hi there, welcome to this session on engaging young workers at Organise 2020. My name is Alex Graham and I'm about to become the chair of the TUC's Young Workers Forum. This is obviously a really important session today, as workers under the age of 34 make up 2 in every 5 workers in the UK, but only about 1 in 10 of them are in a union. Engaging them because of this fact has always been really important, but it's going to be even more important after we come out of the COVID-19 pandemic. I've got 2 absolutely brilliant speakers with me today, Claire and Dave, and I'll do a bit more of an introduction to them in a moment. I just have to make a couple of announcements first. So if you bear with me, I'll just make them now. The first announcement is that this session is being recorded today and it might be posted up onto YouTube as well. I swear that there's absolutely no connection between that and the fact that I've had my first post-COVID haircut yesterday. But please do bear in mind that this is going to be recorded and may be put up onto YouTube. Secondly, there's going to be a question and answer session after both speakers have spoken. There's a button at the bottom of your screen that's labelled Q&A, and you can ask questions on there at any time, but the speakers will come along and answer them after they've both spoken. So I'm going to turn now to my first speaker, who is Dave McCrossen. Dave is the Deputy General Secretary of USDAW. USDAW represent workers in the retail sector. Dave used to work for the co-op and he started his USDAW career in 1989, which was about 3 years before I was born. In an absolutely stellar career, Dave's been both the Deputy Regional Secretary and the Regional Secretary in USDAW's Eastern Division before he became the Deputy General Secretary in 2018. In his role, he's responsible for overseeing and developing the union's organising work. Dave, you're going to have about 10 minutes to speak, and I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to be quite strict on the time so that we can get as much time for question and answer as we possibly can. So over to you now, Dave.
Thanks, Alex. And I promise I will try to be brief. I think it's important that we give people the opportunity to ask questions and share their ideas and thoughts rather than take up people's days. But let me first of all, Alex, thank you for reminding me just how old I am. Congratulations on your haircut, and also in taking over as chair of the Young Workers Forum. It's great to see that people are still willing to step up to the plate. I want to thank everybody for this opportunity to have a chat with you today, particularly the TUC and the amazing work that they do to raise the profile of trade unions constantly, particularly in these difficult times. And the WorkSmart campaign that's been going on for a while now, which has been a kind of revelation in giving people the opportunity to voice their views, to upskill themselves in terms of what trade unions are for and what trade unions are all about. The reality is that since 1979, trade union membership's been heavily in decline, particularly amongst the young, and a lot of that is around people's lack of knowledge and understanding about what trade unions are here for, what we do, what our role in society is. And it's a shame that in that sense that nothing's actually taught about trade unions and the wider labour movement in schools, and that's something that we hope an incoming Labour government, and we can all hope that that's going to be sooner rather than later, will address and put right. We also have, and this was something, one of Margaret Thatcher's many legacies, we have a society where it's more about the culture of the individual sometimes rather than the collective, and that sometimes suits people. You can be sold a pipe dream that one day you could become a multi-billionaire, but if it's going to be on the back of that ambition, that's great, but if it's on the back of other people, I think that's not so fantastic. So we need to kind of remind people that working together we can be far stronger, and the issues that we have as individuals are often the issues that we have as a collective as well. And we can get those issues dealt with far easier and far quicker if we work together and speak with one collective voice. So to survive and prosper as a trade union, and I think it's essential, probably more essential than it's ever been, that the trade union movement survive, we need to reach out to all groups of people, whether it's young or old, whether it's black or white, whether it's about people's gender or religions. It's important that we don't have any barriers that will stop people wanting to get involved and actively become a part. As a trade union, USDAW has around 80,000 members under the age of 25, which is the age limit that we say is a young worker. I know the TUC is slightly different. I'm still hoping that one day the barrier will be lifted so that I can be regarded as a young worker again, or I live in perhaps a forlorn hope of that. One of the ways I think we engage more with people is we do, of course, talk about what we stand for, but we try far more to listen to what people have got to say. And I think one of the big lessons that the whole movement has to take on board is that we shouldn't be lecturing people, we should be listening to what people's fears and concerns are. We struggle, as I think most unions do, not so much around getting people to join, but to get people actively engaged. And part of that, of course, is around people understanding the relevance of the movement, but it's also about the other things that occupy our lives. And it's difficult, particularly in the retail trade, where people's hours and shifts are here, there and everywhere, for people to commit the most important thing, the most valuable thing they've got, which is their time. So we've still got some work to do on that, and it is important that people do get actively involved, because otherwise the agenda doesn't necessarily reflect those individuals. We've worked hard as a union to focus on the dreams and ambitions perhaps of young people. So I personally have never understood why if you do a job, you get paid less money because of your age. It makes absolutely no sense to me. If you do the job, whether you're 18 or 58, you should get paid that. So what we've done over a number of years is with companies where we have agreements with, to first of all erode the variance between the youth rate and the adult rate, to get to a place where those in the main now have been completely eradicated. And I think to do that, we had to educate people a little bit, because it meant trying to explain to an older population that they might have to take a slightly smaller pay rise, maybe only a few pennies less, but in order to make sure that we did the right thing by young people. And the one thing that we all have in common is at one point in time, we were young. So I hope that people carry that memory of that unfairness with them. And the fact that we've managed to convince people that it's a common problem, it's a common issue that affects all of us. That's why we've managed to make some progress there. One of the things that we do have an issue with, particularly in the retail sector, is the way that youth are, in particular, are exploited. Whether that's around moving hours all over the place, whether it's about short hours, or the horror and the scourge that are 0-hour contracts, something which I believe we would have eradicated in the civil society many years ago. It's outrageous to think that people have no guarantee of an income in any given week. And trade unions need to do more around those things, not simply run campaigns, but actively get people involved in those things. And it's good to see other unions get involved in the likes of McDonald's non-unionised workforces, where it's clear that there's a need for trade unions and people want to join trade unions, but employers are doing all that they can, like in Amazon, for example, to stop people joining. And there's a reason for that, because they've got something to hide. If you're a good business, if you've got nothing to hide, there's absolutely no reason why you should try and stop trade unions getting involved in your business. So our campaigns need to be more proactive around listening to what people say are the issues that affect them, and then bringing those campaigns to life. We need to make sure that we understand what people's fears are, what their ambitions are, and I personally want to see more people not being encouraged to dream about things in the future, but we should give them active reasons to dream about what we can have as a society, a fairer society, where everybody is treated equally and rewarded appropriately. And obviously my dogs agree with that, because they've just started barking in the background, so I do apologise for that. So look, I would close this part of the session by simply saying one thing. The reasons why individuals join trade unions are often very different, What is important is that we understand the individual beliefs and the passions of those individuals, so that we can collectively speak with one voice, whether that's around an issue in a shop, or whether that's an issue in a factory or in a bar or a hairdresser's or wherever it is, because together we can actually have a strong voice and we can make a fundamental difference to the world that we live in, the fairer, more equal world that we all want to see. And that's it, Alex.
Thanks for that, Dave. That was really insightful, and I'm sure a lot of people will have got quite a lot of ideas from what you've just said then. I'm going to turn to the second speaker now, who is Clare Coatman. Clare's been a campaigner and an activist for over 12 years. Her specialties in particular are democracy and participation, so really relevant for what we're talking about today. As the TUC's senior campaigner, she's led a major initiative innovating how we reach with young workers. Importantly as well, she's also a Unite rep. So I'll hand over to you now, Clare, to tell us about your work as the TUC's senior campaigner.
Thank you, Alex. I'm really delighted to be speaking about a topic that I feel really passionately about. And as Alex was saying, I led a 3-year programme for the TUC, researching young workers. We learned a huge amount over that time about their experiences, the context of their lives, what their challenges are at work, and how unions can help and recruit them. And there's so much that I could talk about that's very difficult to fit into 10 minutes. So at the end, I'll post a link into the chat of a report that I wrote, which has got the full write-up. But for now, I will just talk through some of the recommendations, which I hope will be helpful for unions and reps in the different contexts that we're all working in. And firstly, I think it's important to say, as I talk about the things that we could maybe do better, that there is fantastic, really great practice out there, like we've just heard from USDAW. But part of the problem is that that good practice is often not common practice. Too often, for example, we think that if only we communicated better with young workers, if we said the same things but said them on Facebook, then they would start joining in significant numbers again. And unfortunately, the research that we conducted suggests that this isn't true, that we need more action than just refreshing how we communicate. Having said that, there are some things that we can do to communicate more effectively with young workers, and that is useful too. So first up is around using design that appeals to this group when we're trying to speak to them particularly. And this means clean, modern, fresh design, not perhaps some examples that I've seen of what we think might appeal to young workers, which might be more like graffiti style writing and lots of bright, bold colours altogether. We also need to go to young workers rather than expecting them to come to us. And that means talking about the issues that matter to young workers in language that resonates with them and in the spaces where they already are, or on platforms that we've designed specifically to work for them. As we communicate with young workers, we also need to think about treating them like they're serious about the world of work. Employers make this mistake all the time. They treat young workers as if they're unreliable and not worth investing in because they're not that serious about their job. And we mustn't make the same mistake. So we can recognise that they're serious about their job and about work by talking about workplace issues, rather than feeling that we have to draw them in with something less substantive. And alongside how we communicate, we also need to do the hard thinking about our offer as a movement and ensuring that it's relevant for young workers. For example, thinking about how we support workers in unorganised workplaces without those crucial recognition agreements, because that's where most young workers are. Also, sadly, home insurance and will writing might not be the best perks for this group. We should consider whether we can make an individualised offer up front as a way of bringing younger workers into the movement before we can then take them on a journey towards collectivism. There are some young workers who don't inherently get it about the idea of forming a collective, and it may be appropriate to take a more individualized approach in order to begin a relationship so that we can then help them understand the power of the collective later. We should also consider whether new members could get instant access to legal support on joining. And it would be helpful if there was a consistent approach across the movement to providing support and representation to young workers right at the point where they realise that they need us, rather than having them wait the sometimes 3 months before they're able to access that legal support. For example, some unions already offer instant support to staff in companies that are organising priorities, and we could consider young workers a priority organising target in the same way, while also, of course, recognising that we can't be sustainable if members leave immediately after benefiting from advice and support. But there are innovative mechanisms that we could use to protect ourselves from this. For example, members who receive legal support within their first 3 months could repay the cost if they leave within a year. And we should talk as a movement about forms of portable membership. Young workers, excuse me, change jobs much more frequently, and we lose a lot of people as they move between workplaces with different recognition agreements. In general, when we're trying to reach any new group, we also need to think more specifically about them and their needs and their experiences, and let that understanding guide us in how we design any new offer. Young workers is too broad to be a useful target audience. And so for my research, we developed a more targeted, narrow audience to guide our research. And you could also think about what is the type of young worker that you're really hoping to reach, at least initially. Developing an offer would also be more successful if we start with the needs of the group we're trying to reach. And if we test ideas with real people from that group and then are honest about the results, then we can go with what we see is working, and new offers stand a much greater chance of success. And that's exactly the model that I used during the 3-year program that culminated in a career coach app called WorkSmart that you can read more about in the report. To do that, it means that we have to listen to the kind of young workers that we want to reach before expecting them to listen to us. And the young workers who are already part of our existing structures, and I include myself in this, are probably not typical. Probably takes a fairly unusual younger worker who really, really wants to join in that committee or become a rep. And that means that we need mechanisms to hear from non-members if the young workers who we're already in touch with may not hold the answers to reaching out to that group who are not yet part of our movement. And finally, we have to innovate. And that means creating space and capacity outside business as usual to experiment, to trial, to test, and not worry if it fails. This can be a real challenge to our culture. It often needs more decentralization, giving decision-making authority to people who are running experiments. And you can hear more about that at 4 o'clock tomorrow, when I'll also be running a session about creating an innovation culture in unions. Now, all of that was a lot. I know I went through at speed. There are a lot of big ideas in there, and it can feel daunting to think about everything in one chunk. But the potential gain of changing our ways of working and what we offer to really work for younger workers is huge, a revitalized and growing modern movement. Thank you for listening, and back over to Alex.
Thanks, Claire. That was really helpful as well. I know I've definitely got some questions for both of you, but we've got some questions that have come in from members of the audience as well. So what we're going to do now is we've got about 25 minutes for questions because you were both so speedy with your answers. So I'm going to ask some of the questions that have already been put, and also encourage people, if you do have a question, there is a question and answer button at the bottom. Please do press it. Please do help us fill up this 25 minutes that we've got till the end of the session, and let Dave and Claire share the benefit of their experience with you. So our first question is from Matt Keogh. Matt says, hi, with a predominantly young workforce in dietetics, which is healthcare, apologies if I've mispronounced that, how can we encourage engagement and collectivization? He says, our union membership is part of our professional body membership, the BDA, and dietitians often see membership as just paying to get your professional liability cover. What do you both have to say to that? I'm going to go to Claire first, because you're the one who's on my screen at the moment. Over
Thanks,
to you.
Alex. And thank you. I think that's a really great question. And I think I would say, I would start by listening to that group and really finding out what it is that they need. And whether you think what they need is a kind of traditional thing that a union would provide or not. Certainly the initial thing that might be interesting to talk to them about would be career development and progression. In a sector with such a vocational commitment that people often have to their careers, it might be that they would really appreciate some kind of mentoring or advice about how they do well and get ahead with their careers in that. Although, as I was saying, good not to make assumptions. So I would definitely go out and talk to as many people in that group as you can and see what it is that they would say.
Dave, have you got anything to add to that?
I've always got something to add to everything, Alex. So I think it's a really good question. Historically, the reason people joined trade unions was often for what were deemed as negative reasons. So if something went wrong and you got the sack, or you had an accident at work, for example. And I think it's important that those things are still there for individuals as an emergency or a safety net. And to comment on the point that Alex made earlier around legal representation, for example, our trade union provides legal representation from day one, so there isn't any minimum membership. But we've also got to start talking about the positive reasons why we would want people to join. So we have a really detailed and fantastic lifelong learning agenda where people can get involved in other activities other than those that they may have done at school or college, for example. And that often is free or at minimal cost. That gives people the opportunity to continue to develop right throughout their working lives. And I think the important thing is also to remember that we learn lots from each other. So if you are a member of a trade union, or more importantly, if you become an activist, representing people or listening to other people's hardships and difficulties at any one time actually makes you a better and more rounded person. So I think it is about listening, as Alex has said, but it's also about talking to people about understanding that the trade union is not limited to a certain model. It can be anything that people want it to be, and we need to do far more around that particular area.
Brilliant. Staying on you then, Dave, the next question is from Jill Watts, and she says, how can we advance transferable membership between unions when people change jobs? I imagine that there's a lot of precarious work in the retail sector. So is this something that you've come across or have strong thoughts about? Sorry, Dave, I think you're muted.
Unmute me. There you go. Am I better now? Okay. I think if I understood the question correctly, it's where, because an awful lot of people, when they first go into retail, have this belief, this misguided belief that retail jobs in particular are jobs that you do until something better comes along, or it's, you know, for pin money, if those things ever really existed. So people often start their careers in retail, and instead of staying there and actually, you know, making it a better profession for all, move on to something else. The difficulty that we have as a trade union movement is that we're all quite isolated from each other as unions, and that's why the TUC is important in terms of bringing together and saying, look, we aren't businesses, we're not here, we're not Tesco's trying to take market share from Morrison's or for Sainsbury's. We should actually be working together. And if that means that we need to find ways of it being possible for one individual to transfer easily and without loss of service and benefits from one trade union to another, I can see no reasonable reason other than perhaps a bit of dogma that we can't sort those things out, because those are things that are hereditary, and we need to kind of think about the real world we live in now. And people are changing jobs often, more often perhaps than they ever did before, and that's not necessarily always through choice. Sometimes it's simply a question of being able to get a few more hours in another place further down the road.
And Claire, would you like to build on that?
Thanks. Yeah, I completely agree with what Dave was saying. I think that it's something that is absolutely best done with greater union coordination and cooperation. And I think that's something that will be really welcome for all of us to think about. And then not nearly as good, but much more easily and quickly achievable is if you're a rep and you know that someone is leaving, then make sure that you grab them before they've left and just say, please do remember to look out for who is the union at the workplace that you're going to, and do sign back up to them.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, it is obviously an issue that we need to look at as a movement completely. The next question, which touches on another very topical issue at the moment, is from Nigel Williams. He says, how do we ensure that workers who were given the status and respect that they're properly due during the COVID crisis, such as key workers, care home staff, retail workers, and transport workers, don't get forgotten as we return to the new normal and get properly rewarded and recognised? And especially among that group, there are a lot of young workers as well. So I'm going to come to you first, Claire, and ask you, how do we make sure that they get the recognition and the rewards that they deserve?
Thank you. Yeah, this is such an important point. I mean, I think in some senses there are no easy answers. I think it comes down to the same campaigning that we always do on any important issue. But I think we do need to recognise that there's a particular opportunity right now that I think public awareness and sentiment and gratitude has never been higher in living memory for this set of key workers. And that presents a fantastic opportunity for us to get people behind campaigns, for us to put more pressure on the government. And I think especially to ask for, excuse me, to ask for really substantive policy wins that would show key workers, not just tell them how much we appreciate them. And so I'm thinking of things like a public sector pay rise.
Definitely, definitely. Dave?
Well, I can't argue with that. I think the first thing in terms of this crisis showed, where we had the clapping, for example, once a week. Clapping was fantastic in terms of recognition that the people that were working in the health service and the care homes, for example, was one thing, but it doesn't put food on the table. It doesn't provide your kids with shoes on their feet. And it's interesting to note yesterday the Chancellor gifted us all a £10 voucher so we can go and spend it, but had to be shamed into providing free school meals by a professional footballer. So the priorities of the government are all wrong. In terms of my union's view, is this that shop workers, who we believe have always been key essential workers, and let's not forget have worked all the way through this crisis. It's no good for people to say what a fantastic job they've done when they're being faced with abuse and threats of physical violence and real actual violence every single day of their working lives. For menial pay, we need to see some of these employers stepping up and actually paying people a decent living wage, and that's not the government's version of the living wage. So I think we need to, but I'll be candid around this. My mum was sadly passed away because of COVID-19. She was one of those that was shunted from the health service, from a hospital, into a care home. And I know Boris Johnson is now trying to blame the care homes for all of his failure to manage this situation properly. When I visited her, I was lucky enough to be able to visit her in the care home. The fact that they had just basic equipment like bits of plastic that they were covering their bodies with, and cheap gloves that split as soon as they put on, it was shameful. People shouldn't have had to work through those conditions, and we didn't learn the lessons then, and people paid for it with their lives. We need to ensure that when we do reach the end of this, we don't talk about the wonderful job that people do. We actually show people, and that's in money, it's in the way they're treated in the workplace, and it's by the general public actually putting some of this into practice. Don't clap people. When you're in a shop, thank people and be appreciative. And if you're queuing up for 10 minutes, it isn't the shop worker's fault. I trust you. Trust me. If the trolley is wonky, it isn't the person who's working behind the till who's to blame for that. So I think we've all got a responsibility to introduce a little bit more justice and fairness into the world we live in.
I definitely agree with you, Dave, and I'm really sorry to hear about your mum as well.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Sorry to hear about that, Dave. And also, I think this crisis has really shown us who are the truly essential workers, who are actually working on the front line. And it's people working in healthcare, but also on the shop floor, delivering, posties, anyone who is having to go out and about and expose themselves to risk deserves all of our gratitude.
And I think you're completely right to say that you can't eat a clap, it doesn't feed your family. The Prime Minister says that he doesn't do gestures, but he obviously also doesn't do substance either. If I can stick with you then, Dave, and ask you this question from Elizabeth Greenough. She says, how can we reach out to young members on social media for workplaces that are largely working from home at the moment? I think it's really part of a broader question that would ask, does home working make it harder for us to organise?
Well, good question, Elizabeth. Organising is tough at the best of times because people often, even in a real workplace, don't have as much time or opportunity as they would like in order to be able to speak to their colleagues about issues affecting them or even about joining a union. So unions clearly need to be better at social media. And I think Alex touched on this in her opening presentation in terms of, we need to give some thought as to what we're putting out there because it has to connect with people. So again, all of these things are around conversations and listening to people because particularly now where people are working at home and in isolation in many instances. And I have to say that causes me real concern for the future because I think once we do come out of this crisis, we're going to be faced with a huge mental health issue as well, where people have been socially disconnected from people for so long. We need to again be talking about the things that are of concern to people, because the things that you're sitting at home worrying about, I can guarantee you, are the very same things that people are suffering in silence around. And trade unions give people the opportunity to have a voice, to have a say in a way that can't be ignored, in a way that can't be shouted down. And that's been too often the case. And it's almost as if you work in a workplace and you've got anything to say that's in any way negative, there's the door, you leave. Well, actually, no, that isn't the case, because if as soon as we accept that, we're accepting that it's okay for employers to treat people like dirt, and too many do. And that's where we need to make sure that we're sharing our experiences, talking about the things that annoy us, that antagonise us, and carrying that with us. Don't, when you get to my age, I haven't forgotten what it was like to be young. Lots of people tell me I've never actually grown up properly, but I think it's important to remember the things that were burning injustices when I was young are still burning injustices today, and we need to take the opportunities that we have to make that fundamental difference to people's lives.
And Claire?
Yeah, I think Dave touched on this as well, where with people working from home more, it is more challenging in the sense of reaching them for organising, but also I think it's probably not as different as it might be. I think we're closer during COVID to where we were 6 months ago, of quite a fragmented workforce, often nowhere private to meet on site. Often people, you know, if you're a care worker, you might be out in your car much more seeing clients than you are face to face with colleagues. And so I think this amps up the challenges in organising that we were already facing. I think we're so far from all of us being in the same workplace, over set hours, all going off on break at the same time, having a break room where we could have gone and spoken to each other about organising issues. So absolutely, I think social media does play an important role in the new landscape, in reaching people. And I think, again, it's about recognising that different things work for different people. Different platforms are going to work for different groups and for different things you're trying to achieve. And so I'd always start with the question of who is it you're trying to reach, where are they, and then go to them. One very specific note is the demise of Facebook has been greatly exaggerated. People talk about how Facebook is done and numbers are falling, and it's all about these, you know, the new platforms that have superseded it. Some of the new platforms are still important to engage with. The TC has an Instagram account that we're really focusing on and growing. But one thing to consider is Facebook achieved such vast numbers and is at such huge scale that when Facebook shrinks a bit, it's still got objectively enormous numbers of people on it. And so I think that's still a really, really key platform to be looking at for organising.
Do you think, either of you, that there are any advantages that have come out of the shift in technology that have come about through COVID for organising?
I definitely feel like digital is hugely important in modern organising. I think it does not replace face-to-face organising, but it's a fantastic complement to it. Through using digital, you can reach people who you can't reach through face-to-face, and you can also achieve much greater scale with digital than you ever can through face-to-face. And in particular, there's a fantastic complementarity in using online organising to get offline organising. And I think that one thing that has been constructive through this awful situation is it's kind of given us all a bit of a push in the right direction. I think as a movement, we've been circling around digital, we've been doing what we can, we've been engaging with it, we've been really trying, and I think we were still finding it quite hard to move to a position where digital was really integrated through everything we did, and that it was as natural as some of the more traditional forms of organising. And so I definitely think that this has forced our hand a bit to maybe get where we were going a bit quicker.
And Dave?
I agree absolutely with Alex. I think the trade union movement is very similar to any other organisation. You tend to get pretty much set in your ways. You know, we're all creatures of habit. You know, we tend to, when we can go to the hairdressers, go to the same hairdressers, shopping in the same shops, etc. And I think it's because trade unions have got 100 or 150 years of history of working in a particular way. It's been quite difficult to kind of, at any speed, to come out of that. So I think one of the few positives that has come out of it is it's made trade unions think about the way we use technology and utilise it. What comes out the other end has to be a more balanced approach, because I think it's essential that we're still having those face-to-face connections where we can talk to people about their ambitions, their concerns, their fears and whatever. But a positive from my union's point of view is that we've had our full-time officers have had more engagement with our activists than they've ever had before. We've asked them to make sure they're making more regular contact with people. And that's far easier if you're sat in the kitchen at home via a telephone or via Zoom or other social media than having to visit a number of workplaces, because obviously there's a restriction on the number of places that you can visit on any given day. So I hope that when this nightmare ends, that we do find the new normal, whatever that looks like, includes the stuff that we did before, but also a more balanced approach and incorporating things like these meetings, but also making sure that we're having more regular contacts and things like apps. for trade unions, there should be an app. Every trade union should have an app where we can quickly and easily go online and do what people do naturally anyway, which is order a pint, do their banking, for example. So these things I think will be hastened because of this. So those are a couple of positives anyway.
Okay, I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to ask maybe definitely one more question, maybe two. So the first one would be a combination of Matt Paul's question and Lisa Lynch's question. So Matt says, given young workers are more transient and themselves don't expect to stay in the job or workplace for long, they obviously don't want to challenge mistreatment or threats to terms and conditions. How do we flip this mindset? And to take the key point of what Lisa said, could one of the ways be to start education about trade unions in secondary schools, colleges, or universities? So over to you first, please, Dave.
Well, all great points. I think I understand sometimes if people are going to be in with an employer for a relatively short period of time, they often take what is the easy route, which is just to tolerate those things, or take the easier option still, and to walk on and find something else. If we all take that same view, things in life never change. It's important that people make a stand. And we're not asking people to make that individual stand. We're not asking people to challenge their employer because of all the difficulties and challenges that brings in isolation. By joining the union, you've got that voice that you can go to, because as I said previously, an individual issue is undoubtedly going to be a collective issue. If you're being mistreated at work, if you're being messed around with your shifts or underpaid or not being paid on time, I can absolutely guarantee you that other people will be too. So we can then get away from this culture of the blue-eyed syndrome, where certain people can get away with absolutely anything because they appear to be a member of the family of management, as opposed to other people who can do no right at all. So I think it's important people join, get involved, talk about the issues, and if you've got a big axe to grind, then let's become an activist, get involved. That's how things change, not just in the workplace, but in the trade union movement as well.
Claire?
Thank you. Yeah, this was something that came through really, really strongly in the research that we conducted as part of my programme. We heard time and time again from young workers when we were talking with them face to face that it just didn't feel worth it, and that it felt really, really challenging to try and change things, and they were going to, exactly as you say, they weren't going to be in the job that long, and so what's the point in trying to fix it? When we dug down and we really, really explored with them exactly what was going on psychologically, we identified 3 barriers essentially to collective organising and to trying to make things better. And I'll go through very, very quickly, but it's in a lot of detail in the report that I shared the link to. So the first barrier was low expectations of the workplace. That for a lot of young workers, they've come into the world of work at a time when precarity is the norm. And so when they get mistreated, they actually just think that's what work is like. They don't recognise that there's a problem. That in turn causes a bit of a problem for us, because if we're going around saying we're your friends when you've got a problem in the workplace and they just don't think they've got a problem, then we're not going to seem relevant. The second barrier is one of low levels of trust among the group, that if you ask a younger worker how they'd feel about trying to change an issue that they do identify, the most common response is, I could never do that, they'd be straight behind my back to the boss and then I'll get in trouble. And this again is a result of the precarity they're under and being in competition for the best shifts or the hours that fit in with their childcare. And then the third barrier is one of futility, of feeling like if you try and change something, it doesn't work, so why would you put your neck on the line anyway? So having understood in real detail where all of that is coming from, we can then start thinking about, okay, how do we design something to tackle and lower those barriers? How do we raise expectations of the workplace, build a sense of trust among that group, and give a sense of hope that things can change for the better? And I would say that In terms of going to schools, I think it is certainly helpful, and I think sometimes we put a bit too much emphasis on it. I think it's really great for people at a young age to have awareness of the trade union movement, and also there's no replacement for having a rep ask you when you're actually in a workplace and when you've had lived experience of the world of work. At school, it can all still seem a bit far removed and hard to understand how it's relevant to you. So yes, going into schools, and much more getting people when they're early in the workplace.
Brilliant, thanks Claire. We've just hit 1:30 now, so I'm probably gonna bring this session to a close in a moment. All that really remains for me to do is say thank you for coming today, and thank you especially to Claire and Dave for the really insightful input that they had on the questions that they were asked in speaking before as well. And I'd just like to remind everybody listening today that there are lots more sessions that you can sign up to. You need to go to www.tuc.org.uk/organise 2020. In particular, I'd like to ask you to consider coming to our evening of music and poetry tonight, which you can find out about on that website. And also, please do, before you go away, sign the organising pledge. There's going to be information about all of those posted in the chat, and we hope to see you at the events tonight or at some of the events in future. Thank you for coming. Thanks. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Alice. Shared it really well. Not the easiest thing in the world to do, is it?
I think I had an easier job than the rest of you. You guys actually have to know things.
Well, I don't know. I think you know, we spend our days waffling, for want of a better description. So it's hard in this one because you get so passionate and angry about stuff, and you try to kind of